Every war ends, not with a bang, not with a surrender ceremony on the deck of a battleship, not with a handshake in front of cameras. Most wars end with something quieter and more complicated, a gradual recognition on all sides that the shooting has become more expensive than whatever it was being done for, a slow exhale, a silence that slowly stops feeling like a pause and starts feeling like an ending. Operation Epic Fury is not over yet, but it is close enough to over that the most important question has shifted. Not how does this end? When does this end? But what comes after? And here is what I find remarkable, genuinely remarkable as someone who has been tracking this conflict since before day one. Almost nobody in the mainstream analysis space is asking that question seriously. The news cycle is still chasing daily strike packages and IRGC propaganda responses and oil market fluctuations. Nobody is standing back and asking the question that actually determines whether the last 42 days meant anything beyond the 42 days themselves. What does Iran look like the morning after? Who runs it? Who rebuilds it? Who makes sure it never threatens the world with a nuclear weapon again? What happens to 90 million Iranian people who had nothing to do with the decisions that started this war? What happens to the region when the gravitational center of radical Shia political Islam suddenly has no functioning government? It is April 2026, day 44 of Operation Epic Fury. And this video is going to answer those questions as honestly and as specifically as I can. Because the day after story is the story that determines whether this conflict was worth the cost. And you deserve to understand it. I want to start by being honest about the hardest part of the day after question, because the United States has been here before, and the record is complicated. Iraq, 2003. Saddam Hussein's regime fell in 21 days. The conventional military victory was so fast, so complete, so dominant that it looked like a template. And then the day after began, no functioning government, a disbanded military with weapons and grievances, sectarian fault lines that had been suppressed by 3 decades of authoritarian rule erupting simultaneously, an occupation that lasted 8 years, cost over 4,000 American lives, and produced a power vacuum that ultimately gave birth to ISIS. Libya 2011. Muammar Gaddafi was removed from power by a NATO air campaign and internal uprising. The day after produced 12 years of civil war, 2 competing governments, open-air slave markets, and a failed state that became a transit point for millions of refugees flooding into Europe. I am not raising these comparisons to be defeatist. I am raising them because understanding what went wrong in those cases is the only way to understand what the United States and its partners are trying to do differently in Iran, and whether the plan they have is actually adequate for what they are about to inherit. Iran is not Iraq, and it is not Libya. It is fundamentally different in 3 ways that matter enormously for the day after calculation. First, scale. Iran has a population of 90 million people. It is the 2nd largest country by area in the Middle East. It has a complex, educated, urbanized middle class that has been chafing under clerical rule for decades. The challenge of post-conflict governance is an order of magnitude larger than anything the United States managed in Iraq or Afghanistan. Second, internal political structure. The Islamic Republic is not a simple military dictatorship held together by one man. It is a layered institutional system: Supreme Leader, Guardian Council, Revolutionary Guard, regular military, elected parliament, religious foundations that control vast economic resources. When the top layer is removed, the layers underneath do not simply disappear. They compete violently, if history is any guide. Third, and this is the factor that changes the calculus more than anything else, Iran has an actual opposition. Not an armed rebel faction backed by foreign powers. A genuine, organic, broad-based domestic opposition movement that has been building since the Green Movement of 2009 and accelerated dramatically with the woman life freedom protests of 2022. There are millions of Iranians, young, educated, connected, furious, who have been waiting for exactly this moment. That third factor is what makes the Iran day after different from every previous American post-conflict experience. The United States does not have to build a political alternative from scratch. It exists. It is inside the country. It has been suppressed and imprisoned and killed for 15 years, and it is watching right now. The question is whether Washington has the strategic patience and the political sophistication to let it lead. I want you to step into a different kind of boots than we have used in this series. Not a soldier's boots, not a commander's bunker, not a trader's pre-dawn office. I want you to step into the apartment of a 28-year-old woman in northern Tehran. Her name, for the purposes of this, is Shirin. She is a software engineer. She went to university in Tehran, speaks 3 languages, has a sister in Toronto, and a brother who was arrested in 2022 for protesting and spent 11 months in Evin prison before being released. She has been awake since 3 a.m. Not because of bombs. The strikes in Tehran have been surgical, targeted at regime infrastructure, and the neighborhood she lives in has been untouched in ways that still feel miraculous and terrifying simultaneously. She has been awake because of what she has been reading on the encrypted messaging apps that somehow still work, the ones the regime has been trying to shut down for 6 weeks, the VPN-tunneled feeds that are her only connection to the real picture of what is happening outside her window. What she is reading tonight is different from anything she has read in 42 days of conflict. She is reading that the IRGC's Southwestern Command has gone silent, that the baseage headquarters in 3 provincial cities have been abandoned, that 2 senior clerics who sit on the Guardian Council have not appeared in public for 4 days, that the state television broadcast, which has been running continuous propaganda about American aggression and Islamic resistance, went off the air for 11 minutes this afternoon and came back with a different anchor reading from a different script in a slightly different tone. Shirin has spent her entire adult life learning to read the gaps between what the regime says and what is actually happening. 11 years of practice. And tonight, the gaps are telling her something she has not allowed herself to believe for a very long time. She opens a voice note from her brother, recorded an hour ago from somewhere she cannot identify. His voice is steady, but she can hear something underneath it. Not fear, the opposite of fear, the specific quality of a person who has been afraid for a long time and has just realized that the thing they were afraid of is smaller than it seemed. He says 4 words before the message cuts out. I think it's time. She puts the phone down on the kitchen table, looks at the pre-dawn darkness outside the window, and for the first time in 11 years, she lets herself imagine what tomorrow actually looks like, not as a fantasy, as a plan, because here is the thing about Shirin that is true of millions of people like her across Iran right now. She has already thought about this. She has already mapped it. The civil society organizations, the professional networks, the diaspora connections, the constitutional framework that existed before 1979 and could exist again. She has been building the architecture of what comes next in her head for a decade, the way you build something you need but are not allowed to have yet. The day after is not a vacuum waiting to be filled. For the Iranian people who have been living under this regime, it is a plan waiting to be executed. The question is whether the world gives them the space to execute it. Let me walk you through the 3 pillars of what a successful Iran day after actually requires. Because there is an actual plan, it is more developed than most people realize, and understanding it is the difference between informed optimism and naive hope. Pillar 1, security transition. The single biggest day after risk in Iran is not political chaos. It is armed chaos. The IRGC, even in a degraded state, represents hundreds of thousands of armed men with weapons, training, and 40-year-old ideological conditioning. The Basiji militia, the regime's internal enforcement arm, has approximately 90,000 active members and a much larger reserve pool of irregular fighters embedded in communities across every province. What the United States and its partners, primarily Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, have been working on for the last several weeks is a sequenced disarmament and reintegration framework. not a repeat of the catastrophic 2003 Iraqi army disbandment that threw 400,000 armed men into unemployment with nothing to do and no reason to cooperate. A differentiated approach. Senior IRGC commanders and Basiji leadership face accountability and vetting processes. Mid-level officers and enlisted men are offered a structured transition. Surrender weapons, register with a new security authority, and receive economic support during a transition period. Will it work perfectly? No. Nothing in post-conflict transitions works perfectly, but the framework exists. It has been war-gamed extensively and critically, unlike Iraq. The United States is not planning to administer it alone. Regional partners with cultural and linguistic knowledge are positioned to lead the ground-level implementation. Pillar 2, economic stabilization. Iran's economy is in severe distress. 42 days of precision strikes on energy infrastructure, bridges, refineries, and financial nodes has compounded 4 decades of sanctions-induced dysfunction. The Iranian rial has essentially collapsed. Unemployment was already at crisis levels before this conflict began. Food security in several provinces is genuinely precarious. The good news, and this is the part that gets missed, is that Iran sits on the 4th largest proven oil reserves in the world, approximately 155 billion barrels. At current prices, that is an asset base worth trillions of dollars. A post-clerical Iran with normal access to international oil markets, with sanctions lifted, with its energy infrastructure rebuilt, possibly with American and Gulf partner investment in that rebuilding, is not a basket case. It is one of the largest economic development opportunities in the world. The Gulf states understand this. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have quietly been in contact with Iranian business leaders and technocrats in the diaspora about exactly this reconstruction investment scenario. Money has a way of accelerating political transitions that ideology cannot. Pillar 3, political legitimacy. This is the hardest pillar and the most important one, and it is where the United States has the most significant role to play, and where restraint is the most powerful tool available. The Iranian opposition does not need America to build its government for it. What it needs, what it has consistently said it needs in every diaspora consultation and every underground organizing document that has come out of Iran over the last decade, is for America to get out of the way quickly enough that the transition government is seen as Iranian, not American installed. The single biggest risk to a successful post-clerical Iran is not the IRGC remnants. It is an American footprint large enough and visible enough that it gives the next generation of Iranian hardliners the same founding myth the current regime used for 47 years. The great Satan installed our government. We must resist. The United States needs to be the guarantor in the background, not the administrator in the foreground. That requires the kind of strategic patience and institutional discipline that Washington has historically struggled to maintain in post-conflict environments. But the stakes of getting it right this time are higher than anything that came before. A stable, prosperous, non-nuclear Iran integrated into the regional economy is worth more to American strategic interests over the next 50 years than anything that could be extracted by maintaining a heavy footprint. Here is what is already happening on the ground inside Iran that the news cycle is almost entirely missing. In the last 2 weeks, as the conventional military picture has become unmistakably clear, something remarkable has begun in Iranian civil society. Not an armed uprising, something more durable than that. Neighborhood councils in at least 7 major cities have begun meeting openly. Not secretly, not underground, openly. Professional associations, lawyers, doctors, engineers, teachers have been issuing public statements calling for a constitutional transition process. University professors who have been self-censoring for 20 years have been publishing. Women who removed their hijabs during the Woman Life Freedom protests and were forced back into compliance by Basij enforcement are back in the streets. And the Basij is not showing up to stop them because the Basij leadership has other problems. The Iranian people are not waiting to be liberated. They are liberating themselves in real time, right now. and the speed and organization of it suggests that Shireen's decade of planning is not unique. It is widespread. Now, I have to stop here for a moment because something genuinely funny happened in the middle of all this historic civil society reawakening. Iranian state television, which has been running 42 days of continuous "we are winning, the Americans are losing, the Islamic Republic is unbreakable" programming, ran a segment last week claiming that the neighborhood councils forming across Iran were actually, I'm completely serious, an American intelligence operation designed to destabilize the country. The American intelligence operation apparently involves thousands of Iranian lawyers, doctors, teachers, and women without hijabs meeting in community centers across a country the size of Western Europe simultaneously. The CIA's logistics capability is genuinely impressive if true. Coordinating that many spontaneous civil society meetings across 12 time zones must be quite a challenge. I'll give them that. But here is the part where I have to be completely honest with you. Because the hopeful picture I just painted, Shireen's plan, the neighborhood councils, the opposition's organizational depth, that picture has a shadow. And the shadow is real. Iran is not ethnically homogeneous. It is a country of Persians, Azeris, Kurds, Arabs, Baluchis, and a dozen smaller groups, all of whom have their own political aspirations and historical grievances that have been suppressed under both the Shah and the Islamic Republic. The moment central authority weakens, those aspirations compete. Kurdish factions in the northwest, Arab separatists in Khuzestan, the oil-rich province, Baluchi insurgent networks in the southeast. A political transition that does not address those aspirations produces not democracy, but fragmentation. And a fragmented Iran, a Lebanon-ized Iran, a Libya-ized Iran, is not a strategic success. It is a different kind of catastrophe with a better-looking opening chapter. The day after has to account for Iran's internal diversity from the very first day, not as an afterthought, as the organizing principle of the entire transition framework. Let me give you the largest possible frame for what is at stake in the Iran day after, because I think it is genuinely one of the most consequential geopolitical moments of the 21st century, and it is being covered like a tactical military story. The Islamic Republic of Iran has been the primary engine of regional instability in the Middle East for 47 years. Not the only engine, not the only problem, but the primary one. Iranian money, weapons, ideology, and personnel have been the common thread running through Hezbollah's construction, Hamas's military capability, the Houthi insurgency, the Iraqi militia network, and 3 decades of anti-American proxy warfare across 5 countries. Remove that engine. Not just damage it, not just set it back, but fundamentally replace it with a government that has different interests and different relationships. And the regional calculus changes at a structural level that no amount of individual strikes or sanctions or diplomatic pressure could have achieved. A post-clerical Iran does not arm Hezbollah. It does not fund Hamas reconstruction. It does not provide the ballistic missiles that have been fired at Saudi and Emirati cities. It does not mine the Strait of Hormuz. It does not pursue a nuclear weapon to use against Israel. It sells oil, it develops its economy, it reconnects its educated diaspora, and it competes in the international system like a normal country. That is not utopian. That is what Iran looked like before 1979. That is what Iran's own people, the overwhelming majority of them, have been saying they want for 15 years of street protests. The United States went to war in Iraq and spent 20 years, 4,000 lives, and $2 trillion, and produced a country that is still functionally a client state of Iran. The cost benefit of that investment is not something anyone defends seriously anymore. What is being attempted in Iran is categorically different. Not an occupation, not an imposed government, not an American-administered reconstruction, a strategic enabling operation, degrade the regime's military and coercive capacity to the point where the Iranian people's own political will can express itself without being crushed by IRGC machine guns. If it works, and I want to be clear that it is not guaranteed, that the ethnic fragmentation risk is real, that the institutional depth of the opposition will be tested severely. But if it works, the strategic dividend is not measurable in years. It is measurable in decades. A stable, integrated, non-nuclear Iran is worth more to American strategic interests, and to Israeli security, and to Gulf stability, and to global energy markets, and to the 90 million Iranians who deserve better than what they have lived under, than any military or economic objective this country has pursued in the modern era. That is what is on the table the morning after the shooting stops. That is why the day after story is the only story that actually matters. I want to close by coming back to Shirin, not the fictional Shirin I asked you to imagine earlier, but the millions of real people she represents. The engineers and lawyers and teachers and students and mothers and brothers who have been living under a government they did not choose, surviving a system that treated their ambition as a threat and their identity as a crime. These are not abstractions. These are human beings with plans and hopes and professional networks and memories of what their country was before 1979 and clear-eyed ideas about what it could be again. They have not been passive. They have been organizing in the only ways available to them under conditions of brutal state suppression. They have been waiting, not passively, actively, for the strategic conditions to shift enough that the cost of resistance drops below the cost of silence. The military campaign that is concluding right now, the strikes, the special operations, the naval blockade, the intelligence collection, the 42 days of extraordinary precision and professional execution by American and allied forces, that campaign has been about a lot of things: preventing a nuclear weapon, opening the Strait of Hormuz, demonstrating American military capability to a watching world. But at its most fundamental level, at the level that will matter most in 20 years, when historians account for what this period meant, it has been about shifting those strategic conditions, creating the space in which 90 million people can make a different choice than the one they have been forced to live with. Whether they get to make that choice depends on what comes next, on the wisdom of the transition framework, on the strategic patience of Washington, on the organizational capacity of the Iranian opposition, on whether the ethnic complexity of the country is managed with sophistication or trampled with impatience. None of that is guaranteed, but for the first time in 47 years, it is possible. And I think that is worth saying clearly, carefully, without overselling it, but clearly. For the comments, and this is the question I genuinely most want your answer to: do you think the Iranian people get their country back, or does history repeat and another form of authoritarian control fill the vacuum? I want to hear what you think. Every single comment gets read. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, signing off.